In our empire, compassion is a defect. The words echoed across the obsidian chamber as two young women stood beneath a ceiling of suspended stars, their silver-blue skin reflecting the cold light of 1,000 watching worlds. Lyra Vexis kept her chin high, her iridescent hair falling like liquid metal over her shoulders, while beside her Nyx Vexis trembled just slightly, violet undertones shimmering beneath her calmer facade. Before them, the High Council's verdict burned in holographic script: exile to Earth. Duration, 30 standard days. Purpose, corrective observation. They had questioned a military directive, nothing more than a suggestion that mercy might stabilize conquered systems faster than fear. For that, they were deemed emotionally unstable. The portal behind them activated with a low harmonic hum, bending light like heat above asphalt in a July desert. Lyra did not look back. "We will endure," she whispered to her sister as gravity shifted and the polished floor vanished beneath their feet. The next sensation was cold. Not ceremonial cold. Not controlled climate from palace towers. Real cold. Mountain cold. Air that burned the lungs and carried the scent of pine and snowmelt. The sisters crashed through branches and landed in a field outside a modest ranch house in western Montana, the impact softened only by late spring grass still wet from thaw. Above them, their transport dissolved into streaks of fading blue fire, scattering into the twilight like meteor dust. Lyra rolled onto her side, breath steady, eyes scanning. Wooden fencing. A red barn weathered by years of wind. A pickup truck parked beside a gravel driveway. No guards. No drones. No empire. Just Earth. Primitive. Nyx muttered, pushing herself upright as the sun dipped below the Rockies, painting the sky in copper and violet. A porch light flicked on. The front door creaked open. Ethan Carter stepped out with a flashlight in one hand and a worn flannel jacket thrown over a white t-shirt. He was 32, broad-shouldered from years of lifting engine parts and stacking hay bales, his pale skin flushed from the cool evening air. He had been finishing dinner when the sky flashed bright enough to rattle the windows. Now he scanned the pasture, boots crunching softly against gravel. "Please tell me that wasn't a meteor landing in my field," he muttered to himself, voice steady but curious. The beam of his flashlight cut across the grass and stopped. Two figures stood there, tall, unfamiliar, skin gleaming like brushed chrome beneath the fading light. Lyra stepped forward instinctively, posture regal despite the mud at her boots. Nyx's fingers flexed as if searching for technology that was no longer there. Ethan lowered the flashlight slightly, not in fear, but in confusion. "Okay," he said slowly, breath fogging faintly in the 50-degree air. "Either I'm still dreaming, or you two just fell out of the sky." Lyra studied him. No weapon drawn. No immediate hostility. Just a human male in work jeans and scuffed boots staring at the impossible with cautious wonder. She had expected chaos. She had expected violence. Instead, she found a man squinting like he was trying to fix a truck engine that wouldn't start. Nyx leaned closer to her sister and whispered, "Is this our punishment?" Lyra did not answer, because for the first time since the sentence was declared, uncertainty, not fear, moved through her. And in the quiet Montana dusk, beneath a porch light that buzzed softly against the gathering dark, the Empire's definition of weakness began to feel strangely incomplete. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet soil and distant pine as Ethan took another careful step forward, stopping a good 10 feet away from the two strangers in his field. Up close, he could see that their skin was not painted or reflective fabric, but something else entirely. A soft metallic sheen that caught the porch light like moonlight on a lake. Their eyes were brighter than any he had seen, not glowing, but clear and focused in a way that made him feel studied. He lifted his free hand slowly, palm open. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, voice even, the same tone he used on skittish horses. "If you need help, you are on my property, which means you are under my roof if you want to be." Lyra blinked at the phrasing. Under my roof. The concept translated instantly through the embedded linguistic matrix still functioning in her neural band. Territorial hospitality. Primitive. Personal. Nyx tilted her head, scanning him with narrowed eyes. "You assume we require assistance," she said, her voice smooth but edged with formality. Ethan gave a small half-smile. You fell out of the sky and landed in a pasture where it gets down to 40 degrees after sunset. That is usually a sign somebody needs a coat. The breeze strengthened, brushing against their thin, ceremonial garments. Nyx suppressed a visible shiver, but Lyra noticed. The Empire had not equipped them for comfort. This was part of the lesson. Exposure, adaptation, humility. Ethan glanced toward the dark tree line, then back at them. Look, I do not know where you came from, and I am not sure I want to guess right now. But I have a heated house, running water, and more soup than I can eat alone. You can stand out here analyzing me, or you can come inside and not freeze. Your call. He turned slightly, not fully exposing his back, but enough to signal trust. Lyra watched every micro-movement. No elevated pulse. No aggressive stance. Just steady breathing and practical concern. Nyx leaned closer. He does not display fear, she murmured. He displays inconvenience. That almost made Lyra smile. She stepped forward first, boots pressing into damp grass. Very well, human Ethan Carter, she said, testing his name carefully. We accept temporary shelter. Ethan nodded once, as if this were an ordinary neighborly arrangement. All right then, that makes this official. Welcome to Montana. The wooden porch creaked under their weight as they approached the house. Warm light spilled through the open doorway, carrying the scent of tomato soup and fresh bread. The interior was simple but orderly, a couch with a folded quilt, a cast-iron stove humming softly, framed photographs on the wall showing a younger Ethan beside an older couple in front of the same barn outside. Nyx paused at the threshold, absorbing the sensory overload. Wood grain, fabric texture, heat radiating in waves. Lyra stepped inside, feeling warmth settle across her skin like sunlight, without ceremony. Ethan closed the door behind them, shutting out the growing chill. You can sit, he said, gesturing toward the table. We will figure out the sky part later. Lyra exchanged a look with her sister. 30 days. Observation. Correction. Yet nothing in their training had prepared them for this. Not hostility. Not interrogation. Just a human offering soup, as if compassion were the most ordinary thing in the universe. And for the first time since the sentence was declared, the punishment felt less like exile and more like something far more complicated. Morning arrived quietly over the ranch, pale sunlight stretching across the wooden floor in long golden bands while frost still clung to the edges of the pasture fence outside. Ethan was already awake, the sound of a coffee grinder humming through the kitchen and the faint scrape of boots against the porch as he stepped out to check the sky. The air read 42 degrees on the small digital thermometer by the door. Lyra stood near the guest room window, watching him through the glass as he tipped his face toward the mountains, judging the weather with nothing more than experience. He consults no data system, Nyx observed from the doorway, her silver hair catching the morning light. He consults habit. Lyra wrapped the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders. Habit implies memory. Memory implies attachment. In the kitchen, Ethan poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug and cracked 2 eggs into a cast-iron pan, the sizzle sharp and immediate. The scent of butter and toasted bread filled the room. When he noticed them standing there, he offered a small nod. Good morning. I figured you might want breakfast. It is not ceremonial, but it is reliable. Nyx approached the table first this time, her movements less guarded than the night before. She ran her fingertips along the grain of the wooden surface, feeling the imperfections carved by years of use. Lyra remained standing for a moment, observing Ethan as he moved with efficient familiarity around the stove. No hesitation, no performance, just routine. You begin labor immediately upon waking, Lyra said. Ethan slid eggs onto 3 plates and set them down. Out here, the day does not wait for anyone. Fences break. Pipes freeze. Weather changes its mind. You either move with it or you fall behind. He placed a fork beside her plate and met her eyes briefly. You can help if you want. Or you can watch. Your choice. The word lingered in the air between them. Choice. Nyx exchanged a glance with her sister. On their world, choices were structured, ranked, evaluated for political impact. Here, the offer seemed almost casual. After breakfast, Ethan led them outside. The barn door groaned as he slid it open, revealing tools hanging in careful order, coils of rope, spare lumber stacked neatly against the far wall. A section of fencing near the north pasture leaned slightly where winter winds had loosened the posts. Ethan handed Nix a pair of work gloves. We are going to reset. That post before the ground softens too much. She stared at the gloves, then at him. You assign us labor without status hierarchy. He shrugged. Out here, if something needs fixing, whoever is standing closest fixes it. Lyra watched as Nix hesitated, then slipped the gloves on. The fabric looked strange against her metallic skin, but she did not remove them. Ethan demonstrated how to hold the wooden post steady while he pressed soil back into place with a steel tamper. The rhythm was simple. Lift, pack, check alignment, repeat. The wind moved gently across the open land, carrying the distant call of a hawk. After several minutes, Nix's movements grew steadier. Lyra stepped forward without being asked and braced the post from the opposite side. Ethan glanced between them, offering a brief smile. See, you are already Montana certified. Nix almost rolled her eyes, but there was less sharpness in it now. Lyra felt the packed earth beneath her palms, the physical resistance of something being restored rather than commanded. No surveillance drones. No observers. Just 3 figures in open land, working side by side beneath a wide American sky. And somewhere beyond the blue horizon, unseen instruments recorded their exile. But here, in the quiet scrape of steel against soil, punishment felt less like correction and more like invitation. By late afternoon, the temperature climbed to nearly 60 degrees. The frost gone, and the pasture smelling faintly of damp earth and sun-warmed wood as Ethan wiped his hands on a faded shop towel and stepped back to examine the straightened fence line. That should hold through spring runoff, he said, more to himself than to them. Nix removed the work gloves slowly, flexing her fingers as if recalibrating to bare sensation. Fine particles of soil clung to the metallic sheen of her skin, catching light in soft bronze flecks. Lyra noticed that she did not immediately brush them away. Ethan leaned a shoulder against the truck and looked toward the mountains, where thin clouds drifted across the peaks like slow-moving ships. You two ever been fishing? He asked casually. Nix tilted her head. Define fishing. He smiled faintly, standing still long enough to let the water do most of the thinking. An hour later, they walked along the narrow path behind the ranch, boots crunching over gravel and dried pine needles. A small river ran clear and steady. Beyond the trees, sunlight breaking across its surface in fractured diamonds. Ethan handed each of them a simple rod, demonstrating how to hold it, how to cast without snapping the line. You do not force it, he said, adjusting Lyra's grip with careful, respectful distance. You let it travel. The line arced forward and settled on the water with a soft ripple. Nix attempted her first cast too sharply, the line tangling midair before falling in a loose loop near her feet. Ethan did not laugh. He only stepped closer and showed her again, patient, steady. The river moved around their boots, cold and clear at 50 degrees, pressing gently against the current of their thoughts. For several quiet minutes, none of them spoke. Wind moved through tall grass along the bank, bending it in slow waves. Somewhere upstream, a bird lifted from the trees. Lyra felt the rod tremble slightly in her hands, not from a catch, but from the subtle vibration of water pulling at the line. It was a sensation she could not simulate through training. You stand here often? She asked. When I need to think, Ethan replied, or when I do not want to. Nix studied the horizon where land met sky without visible boundary. Your world is unguarded, she said softly. No perimeter defense. No atmospheric shields. Ethan glanced at her. We have storms. That keeps things interesting. There was no boast in his tone. No apology either. Just fact. Lyra lowered her gaze to the current. You show no concern that we might bring danger with us. Ethan reeled in his line slowly, water dripping from the hook in bright beads. If I lived my life assuming every stranger was a threat, I would not have much of a life. Nix's line twitched again, and this time she adjusted her stance instead of panicking, letting the rod bend gently. Ethan stepped beside her, close enough to guide but not control. Easy, he said quietly. Let it come to you. The line tightened, then released, leaving only expanding circles on the river's surface. Nix exhaled, not frustrated, just aware. Lyra watched the exchange with growing stillness. There was no dominance here. No hierarchy. Only shared correction, without humiliation. The sun dipped lower, casting amber light across Ethan's pale skin and turning Nyx's violet undertones into deep plum shadows. 30 days, Lyra reminded herself again. Observation. Correction. Yet as the river carried their reflections downstream in fractured shapes, she began to understand something her empire had never calculated. Some strengths were not measured by control. Some power moved quietly, like water, shaping everything it touched without ever raising its voice. Night settled over the ranch in layers of indigo and silver, the river behind them fading into shadow as they walked back toward the house, with rods resting loosely over Ethan's shoulder. The air had cooled again to the high 40s, crisp enough to sharpen every breath. Porch lights glowed softly against the dark field, and above them the Montana sky opened wide and unfiltered, thousands of stars scattered like deliberate imperfections across black glass. Nyx stopped halfway across the pasture, her gaze lifting upward. "Your atmosphere allows full visual exposure," she said quietly. "There is no concealment." Ethan followed her line of sight and smiled faintly. "That is the best part." Lyra felt it too, the scale of it. On her world, city lights and orbital lanes filled the heavens with organized brilliance. Here, the stars looked unclaimed, ancient, patient. They stepped onto the porch, wood creaking under their weight, and Ethan paused before opening the door. "Power is going to flicker tonight," he said casually. "Storm system moving over the ridge. Nothing dramatic. Just wind." As if on cue, a distant roll of thunder moved across the valley, low and steady. Inside, he lit 2 additional lanterns on the kitchen counter, their warm glow reflecting against Lyra's silver-blue skin and soft gold highlights. The first gust hit the house with a firm push, windows rattling briefly in their frames. Nyx stiffened instinctively, scanning for structural weaknesses. Ethan noticed and simply placed a hand against the wooden wall. "It holds," he said. "It always has." Rain began in scattered taps, then strengthened into a steady rhythm against the roof. The power blinked once, twice, then steadied. Lyra moved closer to the window, watching sheets of rain blur the pasture into shifting gray shapes. "Your home has no defensive shield," she observed. Ethan leaned back against the counter, folding his arms loosely. "It has beams, nails, and a foundation poured by my father 20 years ago. That is enough." Lightning flashed briefly across the sky, illuminating the barn and fence in stark white before darkness returned. Nyx looked at him carefully. "You speak of structural resilience with personal pride." He nodded once. "Because someone built it so I could stand in it." The wind intensified, bending the tall grass flat for a moment before releasing it again. Inside, the lantern flames flickered but did not go out. Lyra felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not fear, not calculation, but recognition. The house was not fortified by technology. It was fortified by intention. Ethan moved to the cabinet and retrieved 3 mugs, pouring warm milk and adding a spoonful of honey to each. "Storm nights are better with something warm," he said, handing one to Nyx. She accepted it slowly, studying the steam rising into the lantern light. "Your species responds to environmental threat with comfort," she said. "Sometimes," Ethan replied. "Other times we just wait it out." Thunder rolled again, closer now, shaking the glass faintly. Lyra stepped away from the window and joined them at the table. The storm pressed against the house from every direction, yet inside there was only the sound of rain and steady breathing. Beyond the clouds, somewhere far above the weather system and beyond Earth's orbit, silent instruments continued their observation. Data collected. Emotional variance noted. Yet no instrument could measure the quiet strength of a man standing in a wooden house during a storm, offering warmth without condition. Lyra wrapped both hands around the mug, feeling the heat soak into her palms. Punishment, she reminded herself. Correction. But as lightning traced white lines across the sky and Ethan remained unshaken, she began to suspect the Empire had misunderstood something fundamental. Some structures did not need shields. Some hearts did not need walls. The storm passed sometime before dawn, leaving the air rinsed clean and sharp. The sky stretched pale blue over miles of open pasture as sunlight pooled in quiet patches across the field. Ethan stepped outside early, boots sinking slightly into softened earth, checking the fence line for loose boards and the barn roof for missing shingles. The world smelled different after rain, metallic and fresh, like something reset. Lyra joined him on the porch, her silver-blue skin catching the morning light in subtle gradients, while Nyx lingered near the doorway, gaze drifting upward. At first it looked like a glint against the high atmosphere, faint and easily mistaken for lingering moisture in the sky. Then it held position, perfectly still. That is not weather, Nyx said quietly. Lyra felt the shift immediately, a low vibration along the neural band at the base of her skull, a signal too refined to be natural. Observation protocol had intensified. Above Earth's cloud layer, a sleek craft remained cloaked in refracted light, nearly invisible to human sight, but unmistakable to them. Ethan followed their line of vision and squinted. "You seeing something I am not?" he asked. Lyra did not answer at once. Her pulse steadied deliberately. "Our Empire monitors outcomes," she said. "We are not alone in this experiment." Ethan leaned against the porch railing, unconcerned. "Well, they are welcome to the view. It is free." Nyx stepped forward, tension evident in the set of her shoulders. "If they determine we have integrated too deeply, the evaluation could shift." Ethan glanced at her. "Shift how?" Silence lingered, heavy but controlled. Lyra chose her words carefully. "Our leadership believes emotional attachment compromises strategic clarity." Ethan considered that for a moment, eyes drifting across the pasture where rainwater still clung to fence posts in bright droplets. "Does it?" he asked simply. Nyx opened her mouth to respond, then hesitated. The craft above emitted a faint pulse only they could detect, a silent reminder that their 30-day exile was not without scrutiny. Data streams flowed, behavioral patterns recorded. Lyra felt the pressure of it, the expectation that she remained distant, analytical, unaffected. Ethan stepped off the porch and walked toward the north pasture where runoff had pooled near the base of a low slope. He picked up a shovel from beside the barn and began redirecting the water away from the foundation, movement steady and unhurried. No awareness of orbital judgment. No fear of unseen authority. Just a man protecting his home because it mattered. Nyx watched him for several seconds before moving to assist without being asked. She knelt, guiding the shallow trench deeper with careful precision. Mud streaked across her metallic skin, but she did not flinch. Lyra followed, hands pressing into wet soil, shaping the flow so it would not erode the path. The three of them worked in quiet coordination as the hidden craft lingered far above, silent witness to something it had not fully anticipated. After several minutes, the water began to redirect smoothly, sliding away from the porch steps and toward the open field. Ethan stood and wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "There," he said. "Problem solved." Lyra rose slowly, gaze lifting once more toward the empty sky. The signal from orbit remained, but something within her had changed. They had been sent to observe weakness, to correct deviation. Yet in the simple act of kneeling in wet earth beside a human who did not know he was being measured, she felt clarity instead of compromise. If attachment dulled strategy, why did this feel like strength? The craft above adjusted position, recording the moment without understanding it. And beneath the wide Montana sky, the test quietly evolved into something far more dangerous than rebellion. It became choice. The signal came at dusk, not as thunder, not as light, but as a resonance deep beneath Lyra's awareness, a harmonic code only imperial bloodlines could fully decode. She stood alone at the edge of the pasture while the sky shifted from amber to violet, the mountains carved into silhouette against fading sun. Nyx felt its seconds later and froze mid-step near the barn, eyes lifting toward the upper atmosphere where nothing visible moved. Ethan was stacking split firewood beside the porch, unaware that 30 miles above him the cloaked craft had disengaged passive observation and initiated active evaluation. The air felt the same. The temperature hovered near 55 degrees. Crickets had begun their evening rhythm. Yet the silence between the sisters tightened. "It is a summons," Nyx said quietly. Lyra closed her eyes for a brief moment as encoded directives streamed through the neural band. Evaluation window accelerated. Emotional variance exceeded acceptable threshold. Immediate extraction authorized. She opened her eyes again and looked toward the house where Ethan now leaned back against the railing, wiping sawdust from his palms. "They are ending the trial early," she said. Nyx's posture straightened instinctively, reflex shaped by years of discipline. Then the outcome is determined. Lyra did not answer immediately. Instead, she walked toward Ethan, boots brushing through grass still damp from the morning rain. He glanced up as she approached, reading something in her expression that did not require translation. "That thing up there," he said calmly, nodding toward the empty sky. "It is not just sightseeing anymore, is it?" Lyra stopped a few feet away. The porch light flicked on automatically as daylight thinned, casting warm illumination across his pale skin and reflecting faintly in her silver-blue features. "Our presence here was not exile alone," she said. "It was assessment. If we formed attachment to your species, we would be deemed unfit for succession." Ethan absorbed that without visible shock. "And did you?" It was not accusation. It was not hope. It was a question offered without demand. Nyx stepped closer, voice steadier than her racing pulse. "Attachment is considered contamination." Ethan exhaled softly through his nose and looked out over the pasture, where fence posts stood straight against the horizon. "Funny," he said. "Out here, it is called caring." The sky above shimmered faintly now, distortion barely perceptible as the extraction craft prepared to decloak. Lyra felt the pressure of decision settle fully into her chest. The Empire expected detachment, strategic purity, the absence of vulnerability. Yet in the quiet weeks beneath open sky, in the rhythm of fence posts and fishing lines and storm lanterns, she had discovered something her training had not defined correctly. Compassion did not weaken clarity. It sharpened it. Nyx looked at her sister, understanding passing between them without words. The summons intensified. Final confirmation requested. Lyra stepped closer to Ethan until only the width of a porch step separated them. "If we depart now," she said, voice steady, "our world remains unchanged." Ethan met her gaze evenly. "And if you do not?" The first visible shimmer of the descending craft rippled across the clouds, faint silver lines against deepening blue. Lyra felt the Empire watching, waiting for her to retreat from what she had learned. Instead, she reached up and removed the thin metallic circlet at the base of her neck, the neural interface that bound her to Imperial command. It felt lighter in her hand than it had ever felt on her skin. "Then we choose," she said quietly. Above them, the craft hesitated. And for the first time in its recorded history, the Empire's directive encountered resistance not from rebellion, but from understanding.